What would you do if a child? Everyone swore was blind, turned her face toward a thin ribbon of light, and whispered, I think I saw it. Would you believe your eyes or the experts who told you not to hope? I remember my own breath in that moment. Sharp, shaky, like I had stepped through the wrong door and found a miracle waiting. My name is Julia, and I didn't come to that mansion to save anybody. I came because I needed work, and because grief had turned my little apartment into a quiet that hurt. You know what I mean when the kettle whistles and you realize it is the loudest sound your day has made. The Wakefield house had its own kind of quiet. The kind that sits in the corners, heavy furniture. You can't move long hallways that look expensive and feel empty. He opened the door himself when I showed up for the interview, not a manager, not a gatekeeper, just the man from the magazines, the one people talk about like he is a machine that prints money. Richard Wakefield. Up close, he didn't look like business pages. He looked like a father who hadn't slept well in 5 years, eyes tired, beard showing too much gray for 42. He told me there'd be other staff, but most days it was just him and his daughter Luna. He said the word blind, the way people say a scar they live with. Flat voice, steady, careful, like any emotion, would split it open. I nodded, said I could start Monday, and kept the rest of my story in my pocket. The empty crib, the way I flinched at commercials with newborns, the ache that made time feel slow. Luna sat by the same window most afternoons, a soft square of light on the rug, a teddy bear with one ear rubbed thin. She didn't look at me when I walked by, didn't look at anything. Her face turned toward the glass like she knew where the day was and had decided not to meet it. I learned the rhythm of the house. No clinking cups, no slammed doors, staff who moved like whispers. I kept my kindness small, filled the dishwasher, folded linen, left rooms the way I found them. That was the plan. Keep it simple. Keep it clean. Then there was the hum. Barely there, more breath than note coming from the floor near her door. I froze, let my hands keep folding so she wouldn't feel my attention like pressure, and listened. Another day, different hour, I dropped a cleaning cloth, not loud, just a thud against rug, and I swear Luna flinched, a tiny clip of a movement, like a bird deciding to fly. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I wanted to see something that wasn't there. I told myself to stop making a story out of crumbs, but the crumbs kept appearing. A drawer slid closed. Her chin tipped. My shoe tapped a loose board. Her head shifted. Hold on. I opened a window for air, and dust floated into the sunlight like glitter, and her face turned the slightest degree toward the brightness. Light doesn't make noise. My stomach dropped like the first step down a dark stair. I didn't say a word to anyone. I did something else instead. I started a little notebook I could fold into my pocket. Time of day, what sound, what light, where her eyes went, whether her pupils twitched. I'm not a doctor, I know that, but I know how to pay attention, and sometimes that is the whole job. I used the flashlight on my phone like it was a secret. One slow sweep near her shoulder, nothing. I moved it a touch higher, tight beam across her eyes, and there it was. A blink, not dramatic, not a movie scene with violins, just a body saying, I noticed. I held the beam, still turned it off, on again, slower, and her lids trembled. Her pupils nudged like someone pushing awake. You ever stand so still your bones complain? That was me. I didn't want to scare her, or worse, give Richard a reason to fire me for stepping outside the invisible lines. Later that afternoon, putting towels away in the upstairs bath, I found a wooden box behind a stack of extra linens, the kind of hiding place that thinks it is clever. Inside were small brown bottles, labels, smudged dates that reached back years. Eye drops, The sheet with instructions had chemical names that didn't look like anything I had seen in a drugstore aisle. I took a quick picture, put everything back exactly how I found it, and felt a chill that didn't belong to the air conditioning. I told myself to mind my job, clean, be kind, keep my head down, and the next day I broke my own rule. I sat on the rug across from Luna and spoke like you talk to a skittish animal, easy and low. "Luna, I'm going to move a little light, if it bothers you. Tell me and I'll stop." "Okay." She didn't answer. She rarely did, so I lifted the beam, a thread of brightness between us, and watched her eyes like I was watching a tide. One blink, then another quicker, as if confusion had a rhythm, and I felt my breath thin out. "Do you feel that?" I whispered, and she tilted her head, her eyebrows pinched like she was searching a word, and then she said it so soft, I wondered if I made it up. "I think I saw a light." Mommy. Everything in me broke and stitched itself back together in the same second, not because she called me that, I knew who she meant, what that word carried, but because her voice had hope threaded through it, because a quiet child had reached for something instead of letting the whole world pass around her. I put my hand on her shoulder and said what you say when there is nothing smarter to say, "I'm here," and she leaned into me like trust was a chair she hadn't sat in for a while. Then the moment shattered. "What are you doing?" A voice hit the doorway like a slammed book. Richard stepped into the room, anger waking up his face, eyes on the flashlight, like it was a weapon. "Are you experimenting on my daughter?" he snapped. And sure, I heard the accusation, but under it I heard the terror, the kind that dresses up as control. I didn't get to answer. Luna did. She stood. Not careful, not cautious, not the slow, measured steps I'd learned to expect. She stood and ran to me, arms around my waist, holding on like the room was moving. Richard stopped, caught by a sight he had never seen, his mouth open, like he was about to say a prayer he didn't believe in. "Luna," he said, trying to make his voice soft, and she turned toward him and said it again, steadier. "I saw a light." Silence landed heavy. He swallowed, nodded once, and said what would change everything. "Stop the drops at least for now. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind." We stopped them. Day 1, nothing I'd bet money on. Day 2, she turned her face to the window and stayed there, not just a tilt, a hold, like she could feel the warmth sitting on her skin. On day 3, I made simple flashcards. Black circle, black square, black triangle on white. And when I lifted the circle, then the square, then the triangle, she lifted her hand and hesitated and pointed toward the circle. I didn't gasp out loud, but inside I did a cartwheel. Richard, who had started hovering in doorways like a man afraid to break a fragile spell, stepped closer, was hushed. She saw that, and I just nodded, because if I spoke, I might cry. Progress was stubborn, not flashy. A yellow rubber duck, a red ball, a blue car. I set them on the rug, nudged the duck so its shadow shifted, and she smiled, pointed. She started asking questions in a voice that still surprised her. "What color is that?" pointing at a blanket, and I answered softly. And she asked again and again, as if language had been waiting in the walls. Nights came easier. Richard would sit with us, instead of in the doorway, hold an old photo album, as if it might break, and Luna would squint and whisper, "Who is the lady in the red dress?" And I would see a father, both wrecked and reborn in the same breath. But the question sat in me like a hot coin I couldn't put down. What if the drops had done this? What if we had dimmed a child's world on purpose without ever intending to? I needed truth, not hunch. I took one bottle, tucked it into my purse, drove 2 towns over, and met an old friend for coffee in a hospital cafeteria that smelled like overcooked broccoli and bleach. Sophia and I had slogged through early nursing together. She had gone on into ophthalmology, She knew how to tell me hard things without dressing them up. I gave her the bottle, my notebook, and the simple request: please find out what this is. A few days later, she called with a voice you sit down for. In her small office, she slid a lab report across the desk and tapped a paragraph, calm but tight. The compound wasn't some harmless lubricating drop. It was a heavy dose of a drug that messes with light response locks. The focusing muscles convinces pupils to behave like closed doors. In tiny, careful doses, it can be useful, sure, but this formula, this dosage, this pattern, aggressive, prolonged, especially in a child with any residual vision, it could turn the world dim enough to make everybody believe in total darkness. I stared at the page until the black type felt like it was moving. At the bottom was a name I recognized from the labels tucked into Luna's files. Prescribed by Dr. Atticus Morrow. I asked the decent person's question: could this be a mistake? A sloppy pharmacy, a typo, a treatment plan that changed, and no one updated. Sophia's headshake landed like a door closing. This formulation is intentional, she said. Then the twist hit like cold water. There were whispers in the medical community, multi-state complaints, licenses, suspended settlements that never reached national news, a doctor who had a habit of prescribing outside the center line and leaving a wake of damaged families who couldn't get anyone to listen. I drove back to the mansion, with my hands clenched too tight on the wheel, feeling equal parts sick and furious. I put the report on Richard's desk and watched him read, watched grief and guilt and disbelief fight each other on his face. He treated her from birth, he said, like he needed the room to argue. He told me her optic nerve was underdeveloped, that she would never see. He looked at me and the businessman dropped away, leaving a father who had done his best inside the worst kinds of nights. I trusted him. I reached across not to fix what couldn't be fixed, just to say we are on the same side. You did what parents do when they're scared, I said. You listened to the white coat. But now we know. We thought sharing the truth would feel like opening a window. Instead, it felt like someone lit a match. The morning after we gave a respected reporter copies of the lab results and prescription history, a different article popped up online, fast and mean, calling Richard negligent, saying he had refused therapies, hinting that I was manipulating a grieving man. Anonymous messages found my phone. You should stop, not your business, stay out, or you'll regret it. Do you back down, or do you keep going? Be honest. If it were you, what would you have done? We kept going. We found a specialist with no patience for power games, someone who talked to Luna, not around her. He confirmed what our eyes had already started to trust. Partial functional vision, not perfect, maybe never, but real. And he set us up with visual stimulation that made sense. High-contrast cards, slow-moving objects, bright rooms, short sessions stacked like bricks. Back home, the atmosphere changed. The staff, who had been ghosts out of respect, started smiling. Richard sat with us on purpose, not by accident. Luna laughed at silly stories, then drew pictures with shaky lines that said more than words. Yellow became her favorite. She said the word like it tasted good. Meanwhile, we kept pulling at the thread. The district attorney listened. Subpoenas went out. Paper trails tried to hide and couldn't. There were contracts between Dr. Morrow and companies with too many syllables, access to experimental compounds, not yet cleared for little bodies' incentives that looked like money dressed up in lab coats. Yeah, that happened. Families came forward once the first story broke, not all rich, not all connected, but all carrying the same ache. A kid who started life with a little light and lost it under a prescription nobody questioned. They found him living quiet, under a different name, a few states over. The arrest didn't feel like a victory lap, it felt like a necessary line drawn. The trial moved the way courts move, deliberate, slow, careful to a fault. Parents sat on benches and told the worst chapters of their lives out loud. Corporations issued statements that tried to be air and ended up being smoke, and the paper trail kept marching onto the table. I told the truth plain one step after another, how I watched a girl blink at a sliver of light, how we stopped the drops and the world opened a crack, how a lab report made everything that didn't make sense line up. Richard said the thing that took the most courage that grief had made him trust without question, and that he would spend years making it right. The verdict was guilty. Sentences were read. Fines were issued. Systems promised to tighten. I wish that were the end of every story like this. Back home, we didn't throw a party. We made soup, and Luna showed us a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands and said, "It's us." And that was the only ceremony I needed. Richard turned a spare room into a small studio, shelves of crayons and paper, a cheap speaker for soft music, and yellow everywhere, because that color made her smile. School welcomed her with a plan that respected both her limits and her potential, and she came home talking faster, pointing out the way sunlight moves across the kitchen floor like it is a living thing. One night as we cleaned up dinner, Richard looked at me with something gentle in his face, a mix of permission and gratitude, and I knew, without a speech, that the 3 of us had crossed a line together, from surviving to living. Listen, if I closed the book right here, you would leave with a warm feeling and a tidy bow, but clean endings don't teach much. So let me ask the messy questions. How much power are we comfortable handing to people because they wear a white coat, or hold a title, or speak confidently? Where is the line between trust and surrender? Do we blame parents for believing the first diagnosis, or a system that makes second opinions hard to get, unless you have time and money and connections? Do you think that's fair? And what do we do about the quiet incentives that live in the shadows of medicine? Funding that nudges choices, data that looks clean, and isn't settlements that bury stories people need to hear. I think about that wooden box of bottles a lot. Labels rubbed thin dates marching back through years. And I wonder how many more boxes sit behind towels in houses that don't make the news. I think about the messages that hit my phone like cowards in the night, and how quickly lies travel when money gives them a ride. I think about Richard in the doorway, frozen, while his daughter ran toward a voice with hope stitched to it. And I tell myself what I want you to hear too. When an expert tells you the door is locked, try the handle anyway, ask the second question, then the third. If it were you, what would you have done when your flashlight found a blink? Would you have turned it off and gone back to folding towels, or would you have risked being wrong to discover you were right? And if you've lived through something like this, a label that turned out to be a cage, a system that told you to hush, a tiny sign that saved you when you listened, put it in the comments. Someone up late tonight needs to read your story and believe in their own light. If this hit you in the chest, tap like so it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe if you want more true stories, told in a real voice, and share this with a friend who is stuck between what an expert said and what their gut knows. Now tell me, where do we draw the line on medical authority, on accountability, on the price of trust? Argue with me, agree with me, bring your receipts. I'll be there reading and learning with you. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just Luna's story or mine, it is a question we all have to answer. When the room is quiet and a small voice says, "I think I saw a light," do we listen?